All right, greetings everyone. My name is Chrystall Kanyuck-Abel. I'm the Department of Disaster Management Information and Education Manager, and I'm here with Jasen Penn. He's our DDM Emergency Communications Manager, and we're going to be talking this evening about the best ways to stay informed throughout the hurricane season. Welcome, Jasen.
Hi, thank you for having me this afternoon, Chrystall.
To start off, can you tell us what the forecasters are saying we can expect this season?
Well, by now, Chrystall, I think everybody would have known there have been a number of forecasts for the last few months, and the forecasters have indicated that we expect an above average season. They've even carried the forecast up to 19 named hurricanes, 10 storms, and 4 strong hurricanes. And that's above average because for the last 30 years, the data that they use, the regular average have been 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. So right there, it tells you that it's above average.
Yeah, noticeably more activity is what we're expecting then.
That is rightfully so.
Okay.
Yeah. I should also mention that as we've seen early on in the season, even in the month of May, we've had 2 storms already. Alpha and Bertha, and then we had Chrystall in June. Indication that things are moving on quite speedily, and we should begin, if we haven't started preparing for the upcoming season.
But another thing that the forecasters tell us is that even though we've had some storms early, and of course we should be ready all season long, is that each year there's always kind of a peak. When is that?
The peak is usually around September, and the reason for that being the peak is coming towards the month of September, wind shear is pretty much at its lowest, and it's usually the time when the sea surface temperatures are even at their highest. So just right in beginning of August, we can see where the systems start to ramp up coming off of the Atlantic, and going into September is when they come off more frequently. So we'll have a lot more coming around the middle of September. That would be the peak season, peak time for the season.
Right. So that's some good generalities for us to know. In terms of information sources that we can monitor throughout the season, what are the ones that you recommend that we keep an eye on at home?
Well, there are a number of different sources that people can use to get information from. A lot of people go to the National Hurricane Center, the Weather Channel, Weather Underground, Storm Carib, and you have Antigua Met, and there's also a host of other forecasting agencies that people can use. But what we should bear in mind, though, is when it comes to localized information, we should pay close attention to the information that's distributed by DDM. We also should pay very close attention to the information that's coming out of government, because that's your localized source, and that information is more geared towards what's happening locally. The Weather Channel is a good source for weather information, but persons should also bear in mind that the Weather Channel is a commercial-based type entity, and it tends to drive weather forecasts based on their viewership. So that means if there are 2 systems that are coming this way, if there's one coming directly in our path, and there's a system that's actually affecting the U.S., you're going to pay more attention to the system that's affecting them more so than the Caribbean. So that's why you should also make it a habit to monitor your local, monitor the DDM, and try and monitor your local forecasting agencies closer to home.
And so for us, the official forecasting agency is?
The Antigua Meteorological and Barbuda Service is the official forecasting agency for the British Virgin Islands.
Right. And that's the same one people would sometimes hear us refer to it as Antigua Met.
That's correct.
Yeah. When we are monitoring these different channels, we're at home. What's the most affordable, the most accessible message receiving tool that we have?
The most affordable is a transistor radio. Technology has improved where we can pick up the radio stations on our phone, on our computers, on our iPads, tablets, you name it. Radio communications is everywhere now. But the most affordable would be is to get yourself a transistor radio, a radio that has AM and FM frequencies in it. You should also check your batteries and make sure that you have spare batteries and the batteries in the radio haven't expired. And a good habit to check as well is to ensure that you know the actual frequencies that you can tune into. We have local stations, AM and FM, but there might be stations that you do not frequent very often. Some persons listen to the very secular, others would listen to the regular FM stations that play the up-to-date music and stuff. So it would be good to know actually all of your stations, so in the event you could switch to either which one. And also don't forget, being that we're so close to the US and some of our Caribbean counterparts, there are AM and FM stations that you can pick up as well. So you should be familiar with them in the event there's emergency, that you will know exactly which stations to tune into.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the frequencies too, because depending on where you are within the territory, there might be certain stations that you have really good reception and then others that aren't as strong. So if you're going through the test and you know which ones you get at home, those can be the ones that you can rely on,
That's true.
in an emergency. What about messages that we can receive right on our mobile devices?
You could use a number of different applications that we use. We have the DDM app that we've been using for quite some time. Presently, we have over 5,000 active subscribers. We love to get more. The app is available in the Google Play Store as well as the Apple Store. You can download it from either store. And once it's on your phone, that allows us to push different messages and information to the public. We also have a very good we have a very good agreement with the service providers, where we use the SMS platform, and through that we are also able to send different emergency messages as well. Now the difference between the app and using the SMS would have a greater reach of public users more so than our app, but the app would be a little bit more instantaneous.
Okay.
So I'm encouraging persons, if you don't have it and you want to get critical information, information that is instantaneous, you can go ahead and download our app from the two platforms that I just mentioned. Okay.
And I know, even though we're talking about the hurricane season, I know that we use the app for lots of different types of messaging. So if anybody didn't look out the window this morning to notice the Sahara Dust, they would have received a notification about it this morning via the app, right?
That's correct. And also, while you touched on the Sahara Dust, just to let persons know, the dust has been crossing the Atlantic for quite some time. It's actually affecting us now very heavily. Forecasters have indicated that it may linger up until Thursday before we see the dust moving out of the area. Some of the things that persons should bear in mind, especially those that have underlying ailments or issues with asthma and breathing, is that with all this dust, it could create runny and itchy nose, proper issues when breathing, as well as it can trigger asthmatic attacks. So you should safeguard yourself because we can be going through this for the next couple of days. The next thing too that I should mention that is very, very important is the fact that it's very hazy and we have low visibility. So you should take precaution even when you're driving, and more so when you're out on the ocean. As you can see, the visibility is bad. You may not see a vessel until you get very close to it. So it's good right now to take heed and be precautious while you're out there sailing your vessels. And also don't forget to wear your mask if you have one. That could also help as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that reminder. Yeah. That's really important to note. And then what about some of the other options? Like, of course, in disaster management, we're always thinking about backup. Backup communications, backup, how are we going to be in touch? What are some other options that people might have either at home or within their businesses?
Well, as you can see, we have a number of different devices here today that persons can think on purchasing. I know with the whole COVID-19, it would have been difficult for some of us that may not be able to afford some of these, but it's just an option that we're sharing that you can consider. One of the options is just VHF radios. I have in my hand here. Very small unit, very affordable. Some of these units can be purchased in bulk, where you can buy 10 of them for a minimum for not a very large price. Mm-hmm. And what this could allow you to do is to create small networks even within your community or within your family. If you're within line of sight of each other, you could give one to your mom, you could have one if you live close by, and then you're in line of sight of each other. That way you can check on each other from time to time. Mm-hmm. So this is something that can be added to your kit if you don't have it, if you can afford it. This is something that can be used as well. Another item that can also be used for the local populace as well as business owners is satellite communications. We hear a lot about this, using satellite phones for emergency purposes. This particular unit is a ISAT-2 phone. And the way it works, you extend the antenna like this. You have to go outside though. Unlike a cell phone, this device, you must be outdoors when you turn it on in order for it to connect with the satellite. So you'll put your antenna in this way, you turn your device on, it's going to search for a signal. After it gets a signal, it's going to show ready on the screen. And then once it gets a signal, you're allowed to make your phone call. You just punch your number in and you make your phone call this way. So this would be a handy device if you can afford it. This is also a satellite phone, but this is just for a different carrier. This one is, you will call this an Iridium, and it's also a handy device as well. You may be wondering then, why do I have two separate satellite phones? Again, it's all based on the network that you're using. Okay? The satellite phones also allow you to have different plans. You can have plans that are month to month. You can have plans that are up to 6 months, up to a year. You can even have plans where you can have 10 or more or multiple devices sharing a whole pool of minutes across all the devices, which then makes it a little bit more cheaper and a little bit more affordable. In this unit right here, this is a satellite device as well, but this is typically used for data communications. Mm-hmm. And this is what you would call a BGAN. So you could connect this to a computer, or you can connect it to a network, and you'll be able, once you select your package with your service provider, it allows you to get internet access. But I must also emphasize that these are just options. Some are a bit more costly than some, but it's just something that that persons could consider having as part of their backup arsenal when it comes to communications.
Yeah, and
not to cut you. Also, I should also indicate as well that the service providers have been doing a lot in order to strengthen their networks. So the hope is, even though you have this backup, is that everything, that your connections will still remain active, even in spite of everything else. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of these seem like really good solutions for corporate entities that just cannot afford to be offline.
True. That's very true.
Yeah. And then, we've spoken about sort of our standard connections. We're talking about our backup communications. Tell me a little bit about the low-tech communications, low-tech ways of staying in touch. God forbid we don't want to have another impact like Irma, but should a serious impact like that happen, what should people do in order to get the information that they need?
Well, low-tech, I would say the very, very low-tech is, going to shelters, or even going to the neighbor's house, or even going to satellite EOCs. I should emphasize that we're going to be rolling out some satellite EOCs as well. Those would be hubs that are similar to the large emergency operations centers. We're going to have a satellite EOC in the eastern area, and there's also going to be a satellite EOC in the district of Jocelyn Dyke. And what that would entail is where you can get information, you can leave contact numbers. They're going to have different forms of communications there. So persons could descend on these satellite EOCs in the event they don't have anything to receive, and also leave questions or concerns that they may have. Persons can also visit shelters that are open would have persons that are there, that are trained in order to provide information if needed, because we'll be getting information to them as well. In terms of also providing information, a lot of the emergency vehicles, they have the ability to provide sound, to provide allow persons to speak via loud hailers, so they can also drive around and give information that way as well. I should also mention that the recent siren project that we've been working on, the sirens that we are now installing, they also have voice capabilities as well. I know we've been testing them, and persons may have thought that it was a guy speaking that's driving around in a car. No, it's actually been the siren that we've been having the test messages on. So those are just some of the things that persons can do in the event if, God forbid, we were to have another Irma. I should also mention too that we've purchased backup FM mobile transmitters that are pretty small, that work via 12-volt battery supplies and cover a great distance as well. It would allow us to also distribute information in that form also.
So back to that battery-operated transistor radio again. But it's comforting to know that some of those old-fashioned community gathering spaces, ways of sharing information, are still going to be useful for us, should we need them.
It is.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is the sort of approach that we take when we're talking about planning for potential impacts. We say, this is before, this is during, and this is after an impact, what you should do. So we've talked quite a bit, I think, about what you should do before an impact, which is to make sure that you have your supplies, you have your plan. Have we left anything out in terms of the before stage of planning?
I think that one of the key things that we can do in the before stages as well, as you mentioned plans, is to check our contact list, ensure that our key information is printed out, you have them in Ziploc bags, ensure that your family actually knows about the plan and know what to do in the event that you have to activate your plan. That would be good before. During, one of the things that we should also bear in mind, as power may go out, you should ensure that your power banks and all your devices were charged beforehand. You can limit the use of those just for critical information. For example, even your cell phone, you could limit the use of your cell phone if it's still functioning during the time of the emergency or the disaster. Again, you have the going right back to the same transistor radio. You can monitor as there may be information that is still flowing, and even afterwards, you can now use that same contact list, reach out to persons to see if they are available, ensure that your supplies that you had, your contact list and everything, and all your critical certificates, if you had to move, that you have those. And another important thing as well is to also bear in mind that we are still experiencing COVID-19. So you should continue to practice whatever social distancing. If you have to evacuate, ensure you have like extra masks or gloves, hand sanitizer, all that stuff. You should also consider that for this hurricane season, as we're going into a season with something that we've never seen or experienced before.
So for those who haven't heard, since you mentioned COVID-19, what if there's some type of emergency and evacuation orders get issued, but it's during the curfew period? What should we do?
Well, even with the COVID-19 and the evacuation, there's a curfew in place. If you have to evacuate, then you would have to move. However, if you're in an area, say for instance, I'll give a quick example. If there were, for instance, a tsunami, and you are in an area where you're in a safe zone, your house is fine, and you don't need to evacuate, then you would still stay in your location. But as I mentioned before, if you have to evacuate, you have to bear in mind that wherever you evacuate to, is to still try and maintain those same COVID-19 practices that you've been practicing before the evacuation. Okay? So in times of extreme emergency, and if you have to move to save your life, then despite COVID-19, you would still have to evacuate if you have to move.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. And then I want to again remind people about our satellite EOCs. We know that we're going to have them in several of the communities, definitely on the sister islands, but it's going to be something different, and it's something based on lessons learned after Hurricane Irma, correct?
Yes, that is rightfully so.
Yeah.
And one thing we realized is that persons were out looking for information, looking for ways to communicate, looking for ways to reach out to loved ones. And with all the roadblocks and being cut off from the sister islands or even major locations on the main island, it was best we came up with this satellite, launching these satellite EOCs, so that it would allow persons that are maybe in these districts, they can go to that particular area and get the information that they need. Not only getting information, but it's sort of I would say, providing a sense of empowerment to the individuals in the communities, because they would be set up in a way that would allow them to start and run somewhat of a small EOC and getting things done and getting things prepared, or getting themselves into that frame of recovery before before we can get back into contact with a major EOC.
Yeah, so if persons need to really get into that response phase, but they may not have access to the capital, they still have some tools to be able to get going.
That's true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, awesome. We have gotten through all the main things that I wanted to make sure we covered for staying informed. Is there anything that you want to add?
I would just want to add that now is the time, if we haven't prepared, start to do so. Remember, we're still experiencing COVID-19 throughout the region, throughout the world, and stay safe.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for everyone who's watching. If you want to know a little bit more about staying informed throughout the season, definitely keep an eye on the government website, on bviddm.com, and of course on our social channels. We're going to be putting out lots more information as the season progresses. Thank you so much.
Thank you.